Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered the Senate hearing chamber expecting to educate the older white male demographic on progressive ideals. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana observed a former bartender holding an economics degree she failed to comprehend, prepared to argue for expensive policies she had never priced. He possessed 5 minutes allotted for inquiry. She lacked any substantial responses. The ensuing events would render her the most ridiculed figure within Congress. The Senate Budget Committee had summoned AOC to provide testimony regarding the Green New Deal, her flagship proposal aiming to overhaul the American economy and rescue the globe from climate disaster. She agreed to attend, believing that testifying before the Senate would lend her authority, making her appear serious and significant, rather than merely another social media personality. She had dedicated hours to reviewing talking points concerning climate change, social justice, and the ethical necessity of immediate action. She possessed statistics regarding carbon emissions alongside narratives about communities suffering from environmental decline. She was prepared to inspire, to challenge, and to argue that only drastic measures could secure the future. However, she was unprepared for Senator John Kennedy. The 72-year-old Republican from Louisiana resembled everyone's grandfather, wearing a wrinkled suit and speaking with an accent that sounded as if he had just arrived from a bayou crawfish boil. When introducing himself to witnesses, he invariably said something akin to, "I am just a simple country lawyer, attempting to grasp all this complex material you intelligent people are discussing." He had a method of appearing harmless, almost slow-witted, as though he struggled to keep pace with urban elites and their sophisticated concepts. What most witnesses failed to realize until it was too late was that John Kennedy was a Rhodes Scholar who had studied at Oxford. He held a law degree from the University of Virginia. He had practiced as an attorney for decades prior to entering politics. During that time, he had mastered the art of inducing hostile witnesses to dismantle their own credibility with their own words. The persona of the simple country lawyer was a performance, and it was devastatingly effective because opponents consistently underestimated him until he had already ensnared them. Kennedy had spent the morning preceding the hearing in his office with his staff, reviewing every public statement AOC had made regarding the Green New Deal, every promise regarding job creation, every claim regarding costs, and every assertion regarding feasibility. They had engaged in compiling what Kennedy termed his list of simple questions. These were direct, fundamental inquiries that any legitimate policy proposal should easily address. How much will this cost? How many jobs will it generate? Specifically, how will you fund it? And where will the power come from? If we ban fossil fuels were questions that sounded almost too basic to ask, which was precisely why they were so dangerous when the respondent lacked answers. AOC possessed talking points. She possessed passion and moral certainty. She had millions of Twitter followers who hung on her every utterance. However, what she lacked was a spreadsheet. What she lacked was a tangible implementation strategy featuring actual figures. What she lacked were answers to fundamental questions. Senator Kennedy was about to reveal that deficiency during the most polite yet destructive 5 minutes of her political career. If you have ever pondered what occurs when someone who sounds intelligent encounters someone who is actually intelligent, you are about to discover the result. When Kennedy offered his grandfatherly smile and stated, "I am just trying to understand. Help me out here," while AOC became increasingly flustered and defensive, the entire nation would witness the distinction between Twitter popularity and genuine policy expertise, between sounding progressive and being prepared, between a bartender with an economics degree and a Rhodes Scholar feigning ignorance. The Senate Budget Committee hearing chamber was packed with approximately 200 individuals, including staff members, journalists, lobbyists, and citizens who had secured passes to observe what they anticipated would be a fairly standard hearing on environmental policy. The room possessed that specific ambiance of official Washington business, featuring wood paneling and stern portraits of former committee chairmen gazing down from the walls. C-SPAN cameras were positioned to record everything, establishing a permanent archive that would remain accessible indefinitely. AOC entered and assumed her seat at the witness table. At 34 years of age, she wore professional attire that succeeded in looking both congressional and stylish, her signature look that had rendered her a media favorite. She appeared confident, even enthusiastic. This was her opportunity to advocate for her vision on a national platform, to demonstrate she belonged in these corridors of power despite being disregarded by older politicians as merely a young upstart who failed to comprehend how systems actually functioned. The hearing commenced with opening statements from committee members, the standard political theater of both sides defining their positions before any actual interrogation began. Democrats commended AOC for her bold imagination and moral clarity regarding climate change. Republicans voiced skepticism concerning the costs and practicality of such a drastic economic overhaul. AOC endured it all, appearing composed, occasionally nodding when Democrats offered supportive remarks, and keeping a neutral expression when Republicans were critical. Then, the moment arrived for questions. The chairman recognized Senator Kennedy for 5 minutes. Kennedy smiled warmly at AOC as he rearranged some documents before him, taking his time to project the image of a benevolent older gentleman who merely wished to engage in a friendly policy discussion. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, thank you very much for being here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to testify before our committee. His Louisiana accent was heavy and deliberate, with each word taking its time. I have been reading about your Green New Deal proposal, and I must say it appears incredibly ambitious. Transforming our entire economy, renovating every building in America, and reaching zero emissions in 10 years is quite an undertaking. He smiled even more cordially, as if he were genuinely impressed by her vision. Therefore, I hope you can assist me here because I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, and some of this is slightly beyond my comprehension, but I am attempting to grasp the magnitude of what we are discussing. What is the cost of all this? Just a rough estimate, so I can wrap my mind around it. The inquiry sounded innocent enough, almost friendly, just a curious senator attempting to understand. AOC should have identified the snare. AOC launched into her rehearsed talking points regarding how one cannot place a price tag on rescuing the planet, how the cost of inaction would far exceed any investment in the Green New Deal, and how this was truly an investment in America's future rather than an expense to fear. Kennedy listened patiently, nodding along and keeping that grandfatherly expression. When she paused, he interjected with that identical gentle tone. "Ma'am, I appreciate all that, I truly do. Climate change is serious, and nobody is disputing that. But I am asking a simpler question, if you do not mind." He raised his hand and began counting on his fingers as if he were attempting to solve a basic math problem. "What does your plan cost, since you have proposed it? You have asked us to consider it. You must possess some concept of the figures we are discussing. Just assist me in understanding. Is it $10 trillion, $20 trillion, $50 trillion, or what is the general range?" AOC shifted in her chair. This was not proceeding as she had anticipated. The costs have not been fully calculated yet because we are still in the proposal phase. Different economists possess different estimates depending on their assumptions about the variables. Kennedy interrupted softly. "That is what I am hearing. You have proposed transforming the entire American economy, yet you cannot inform us what it costs. Is that accurate? I am stating that the estimates vary widely, but you do not possess a number." Kennedy's smile never faltered. but his voice adopted a slightly sharper edge while remaining perfectly polite. Let me ensure I understand this correctly. You desire to rebuild every building in America, replace every car with an electric vehicle, completely alter how we generate electricity, and transform agriculture, and you are asking the American people to support this massive change. But when I ask what it costs, you do not have an answer. He paused, allowing that reality to sink in. The room was extremely quiet. Ma'am, when I go to the hardware store back home in Louisiana and I tell them I want to renovate my house, do you know the first thing they ask me? They ask me what my budget is because you cannot renovate a house without knowing what you can afford to spend. It appears to me that is something you might want to determine before proposing the largest economic transformation in American history. AOC's cheeks flushed. Senator, with all due respect, the climate crisis demands bold action. We cannot let concerns about cost prevent us from acting. I am not trying to prevent anything, Kennedy said, his tone remaining gentle but firm. I am merely attempting to understand what we are being asked to support. You are a member of Congress. You hold an economics degree from Boston University. Is that correct? Yes. Well then, surely you understand that before you spend money, you need to know how much money you are spending. That is basic economics. But you cannot tell us. That concerns me, ma'am. That should concern every American watching this. You are asking us to support the largest spending program in human history, and you do not know what it costs. AOC attempted to recover. Multiple think tanks have studied this. The costs depend on implementation details that those think tanks utilized to derive numbers between $50 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. Kennedy spoke, no longer playing quite as ignorant. That is what they estimated. But you have dismissed those estimates as not being the point. So I am asking you what the cost is, not what think tanks say. What do you say? The silence that ensued was uncomfortable. AOC did not have an answer. Everyone in that room and everyone watching on C-SPAN could see she lacked a response. She possessed passion and conviction, but lacked numbers. She possessed a vision, but lacked a plan. Kennedy allowed the silence to linger a moment longer than necessary, then moved to his next inquiry, already knowing he had scored his first major point. Simple question. What does it cost? She does not know. Just wants to spend money she has not counted. Kennedy shifted his documents, and his tone became even friendlier if that was possible. Let me ask you about something else that has been in the news. If you do not mind, Amazon wanted to build their second headquarters in New York City. 25,000 jobs, they said. Good-paying jobs too, I heard. But you opposed it, and they decided to go elsewhere. Can you walk me through your reasoning on that? I am attempting to understand the economics of rejecting 25,000 jobs. AOC sat up straighter, clearly feeling she was on firmer ground here. Amazon was asking for nearly $3 billion in tax breaks and subsidies. That is $3 billion that could have been better utilized on our communities, on education, and on infrastructure that benefits everyone, not just one corporation. Kennedy nodded along as if he were following her logic. So the tax breaks could be better spent. That is what you said at the time, is it not? That money could be spent elsewhere? Yes, exactly. Help me understand that. Kennedy leaned forward slightly, maintaining his curious grandfather demeanor. Tax breaks. That is when you do not collect taxes you normally would, correct? You are agreeing not to collect certain taxes in exchange for some benefit, right? So that is money that could go to something else? But ma'am, if Amazon does not come, do you acquire that money to spend? Kennedy's question was delivered so gently, it took a moment for the trap to become apparent. AOC hesitated. The city would not be giving away $3 billion that could be used for other needs. "That is not what I asked," Kennedy said, still smiling but pressing the point. "I asked if Amazon does not come. Do you get that money to spend on other things? Yes or no? The tax structure would be different if they came. Yes or no, ma'am? Simple question. If Amazon does not build their headquarters in New York, does the city possess $3 billion to spend on schools or infrastructure or anything else?" The silence stretched out. Everyone could see AOC was struggling with the question because she was realizing, possibly for the first time, that her understanding of the Amazon deal had been fundamentally wrong. "No," she finally admitted quietly. "No," Kennedy repeated, his voice still gentle but now with an edge of instruction. "Because, see, I think there has been some confusion about how tax breaks work. A tax break is not money you have sitting in a bank account that you can choose to spend on something else. It is money you agree not to collect in the future. If the company does not come, you do not get to collect that money at all. You receive zero. Does that make sense?" AOC looked frustrated now. "The point is that Amazon was asking for corporate welfare while we have needs. Let us do some simple math together." Kennedy interrupted, and he actually withdrew a pen and paper as if he were going to work through a basic arithmetic problem. Amazon said they would bring $27 billion in economic activity over time. The tax breaks were worth $3 billion. So that is $27 billion minus $3 billion. What does that equal? $24 billion, AOC said quietly. $24 billion, Kennedy repeated, writing it down on his paper and holding it up like a teacher showing the class. That is how much New York would have gained even after the tax breaks. But Amazon left. So how much does New York get now? He paused, waiting for her to say it. "Nothing," AOC admitted. "Zero," Kennedy said, writing a large zero on his paper. "You turned $24 billion into zero. 25,000 jobs into zero. All that tax revenue into zero. And you did it because you thought tax breaks were money sitting in a bank account that could be spent elsewhere. You obtained an economics degree from Boston University, correct? Very prestigious school. It probably cost your parents $60,000 a year. And they did not teach you the difference between tax breaks and government spending. The room was dead silent except for the C-SPAN cameras recording every moment. AOC looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Kennedy's voice became even more gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Ma'am, I am just a simple lawyer from Louisiana, but even I know that $24 billion is better than zero. Those were real jobs for real families, real tax revenue for New York's schools and infrastructure, and real economic activity. And you chased it all away because you did not understand basic economics. Those families who would have had those good-paying jobs are not better off because of your decision. New York is not better off. But I guess you felt good about sticking it to Amazon. And maybe that is what matters." He shuffled his papers. "Let us move on. Does not understand tax breaks are not spending. Turned $27 billion into zero. Economics degree. She does not understand." Kennedy looked at his notes as if he were just remembering something. "Oh, one more thing that has been bothering me. Maybe you can clear this up. I heard you say once that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Did I hear that right?" AOC sighed. "That statement has been taken out of context. What I meant was—" "Did you say it?" Kennedy asked simply. "I am not asking about context yet. But did you say that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs?" "Yes, but the point I was making—" "Help me understand the math on that," Kennedy said, and he actually withdrew a calculator from his jacket pocket as if he were going to work through it. If I have 2 jobs, how many times am I counted in the unemployment statistics? AOC could see where this was going. Once, but once, Kennedy repeated. If Senator Durbin over there has 2 jobs, he is counted once. If everyone in this room has 2 jobs, they are each counted once. So having 2 jobs does not make unemployment look lower, does it? That is not how unemployment is calculated. The broader point I was making was about wages and the cost of living. Ma'am, I understand you might have been trying to make a broader point, but your statement was specifically about unemployment. You said unemployment is low because people have 2 jobs. That is mathematically impossible. If I work at the Piggly Wiggly grocery store in the morning and drive for Uber at night, the Bureau of Labor Statistics counts me as one employed person with 2 jobs, not 2 employed people. So that cannot be why unemployment is low. Do you see what I am saying? Kennedy's tone was so patient, so gentle, as if he were explaining basic arithmetic to a child who was struggling with homework. It made AOC's error seem all the more glaring. I misspoke, AOC said defensively. Everyone makes mistakes. That is fair, Kennedy nodded. Everyone does make mistakes, but ma'am, you have an economics degree from Boston University. Your parents spent $240,000 on that education, and you do not know how unemployment statistics are calculated. That is not misspeaking. That is not knowing something fundamental to economics. And that concerns me, because you are proposing huge changes to our economy. If you do not know how unemployment works, how can we trust your judgment on economic policy? AOC looked angry now rather than embarrassed. Senator, I think it is clear you are just trying to make me look bad rather than having a genuine conversation about. I am not trying to make you look bad, Kennedy said, his voice still maddeningly polite. I am just asking simple questions. You made a statement about unemployment that was factually wrong. That is not me making you look bad. That is me asking you to explain a statement you made. If you cannot explain it, that is not my fault. He glanced at his papers. I have still got a couple of minutes. Let us keep going. Said unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. That is not how statistics work. Economics degree, but does not know basics. Kennedy moved to his next topic without giving AOC any time to recover her composure. You support Medicare for all. Is that correct? Yes. Healthcare is a human right, and I agree. Healthcare is important, Kennedy interrupted gently. But let us talk about the economics of it, because that is what we are here to discuss today. Studies estimate Medicare for all would cost about $32 trillion over 10 years. That is about $3.2 trillion per year. How do we pay for that? AOC launched into talking points about taxing the wealthy and corporations, about the savings from eliminating private insurance overhead, and about how other countries manage to provide universal health care. Kennedy listened with that patient expression, then held up his hand. Let me stop you there. Let us do the math together, if you do not mind. He withdrew his paper and pen again. All the billionaires in America combined are worth about $4.6 trillion. That is their total wealth. If we confiscated every penny they have, which we can only do once because then they would have nothing left, that is $4.6 trillion. But Medicare for all costs $32 trillion over 10 years, so that is $4.6 trillion toward a $32 trillion cost. Where does the other $27.4 trillion come from? Corporate taxes, wealth taxes on the very wealthy, eliminating subsidies for. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, but still gently, even if we taxed every corporation in America at 100% of their profits, meaning they got to keep nothing, and we taxed every single person making over $100,000 a year at 100%, meaning they worked for free, we still could not pay for this. The math does not work. I am not trying to be difficult. I am just asking where the money comes from. Real answer, not talking points. AOC looked frustrated. Other countries make it work. Canada, the UK, European countries. Other countries do not have our population, Kennedy said, counting points on his fingers. They do not spend what we spend on defense, because we defend them. They have different healthcare systems than what you are proposing. And most importantly, I am not asking about other countries. I am asking about your plan for America. Where does the $32 trillion come from? Show me the math. The silence that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except Kennedy, who sat there patiently waiting for an answer he knew would not come. The details would need to be worked out, AOC finally said. The details, Kennedy repeated. Ma'am, the cost is not a detail. The cost is pretty much the most important thing. You are proposing the biggest expansion of government in American history, and you are telling me the details of how to pay for it need to be worked out. That is like me going to the bank and asking for a loan to buy a house, and when they ask me how I plan to pay it back, I say, oh, those details need to be worked out. The bank would not give me that loan. Why should the American people give you $32 trillion without knowing how you will pay for it? His time was almost up, but he pressed one more point. See, this is a pattern I am noticing. Green New Deal. You do not know what it costs. Medicare for all. You do not know how to pay for it. Amazon. You did not understand basic tax policy. Unemployment. You did not know how it is calculated. And you have an economics degree. You are in Congress making economic policy. This concerns me, ma'am. It should concern every American watching. Can't explain how to pay for Medicare for all. Math does not work. Just wants to spend $32 trillion she does not have. Kennedy glanced at the clock. He had about 90 seconds left in his 5 minutes. Let me ask about your record real quick. You have been in Congress for about 3 years now. What major legislation have you successfully passed into law? AOC looked caught off guard by the change in direction. I have introduced important legislation. I have shifted the national conversation on issues like. I asked what you have passed, Kennedy said simply. Bills that became law. Major accomplishments. What is your list? The Green New Deal has fundamentally changed how we discuss climate policy. The Green New Deal got 0 votes in the Senate, Kennedy interrupted. When it came up for a vote, not a single senator voted for it, not even Democrats. In the House, your own party would not bring it to the floor for a full vote because they knew it would fail. So that is not passed legislation. That is a failed proposal. What else? AOC tried to pivot to talking about amendments she had introduced, about hearings she had participated in, and about raising awareness on important issues. Kennedy let her talk for a moment, then cut back in. Ma'am, raising awareness is what social media influencers do. You are a member of Congress. Congress passes laws. That is the job. Write bills, get them through committee, pass them in the House. Hope the Senate passes them. President signs them. That is legislating. How many bills have you gotten through that process? The answer was obvious from AOC's silence. None. She had passed nothing of significance. 3 years in Congress, Kennedy said, not bothering to hide his point anymore. 0 major legislation passed into law. But you have millions of Twitter followers. So I guess that is something. Except Twitter is not the same as governing. Tweeting is not the same as legislating. And being famous is not the same as being effective. He gathered his papers as his time expired. Mr. Chairman, I think I am out of time, but I appreciate Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's testimony today. It has been very illuminating. 3 years in Congress, 0 major laws passed. Twitter famous, legislatively useless. The chairman thanked Kennedy and moved to recognize the next senator. But Kennedy held up his hand. "Mr. Chairman, if I could have just 30 more seconds to make a final point." The chairman nodded. Kennedy turned to look at AOC, his expression becoming slightly less grandfatherly and slightly more serious, though still fundamentally respectful in tone. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I want to thank you for your testimony today. I mean that sincerely. You have been very revealing, just not in the way you probably intended." He paused to let that land. "You came here to tell us about your Green New Deal and why we should support it. But when I asked you what it costs, you could not tell me. When I asked you about the Amazon decision, you showed you do not understand the difference between tax breaks and government spending. When I asked about unemployment, you showed you do not know how unemployment is calculated. When I asked about Medicare for all, you could not show me the math for how to pay for it. And when I asked about your legislative record, you could not name a single major accomplishment." Kennedy's voice remained gentle, but his words were devastating. "Now I think you are a talented communicator. You are very good on social media. You know how to get attention and get people excited. Those are real skills, but they are not governing skills. They are marketing skills." He picked up his papers slowly, not rushing. "There is a big difference between sounding smart and being smart, between talking about big ideas and knowing how to implement them, between tweeting and legislating. Today, you have shown us which side of those divides you are on." Kennedy stood up, maintaining that courteous Southern gentleman demeanor even while delivering what everyone recognized as a thorough destruction. "I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, but I know this much. Before you propose transforming the entire American economy, you should probably know what it costs. Before you lecture people about economics, you should probably understand basic economic concepts. Before you tell other people to pay more taxes, you probably should not attend $35,000 parties wearing dresses that say, 'Tax the rich.' And before you ask Americans to trust your judgment, you should probably pass some actual legislation that shows you know what you are doing." He smiled one last time, but it was different now. Less grandfather, more lawyer who had just won his case. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I hope you will go back and do your homework. Figure out what things actually cost. Learn how policies work in practice, not just in theory. Pass some legislation that helps real people. Because right now, you are all talk and no substance. And the American people deserve better than bartender economics from someone with a fancy degree who does not understand it." Kennedy nodded to the chairman. "I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman." The room erupted. Republicans were applauding enthusiastically. Democrats looked uncomfortable, many of them clearly agreeing with Kennedy, even if they could not say so publicly. AOC sat at the witness table, looking stunned, angry, and humiliated all at once. She had come expecting to give inspiring testimony about her vision for America. Instead, a 72-year-old senator with a Southern accent had made her look completely unprepared, using nothing but simple questions delivered with unfailing politeness. And the entire thing was on C-SPAN forever, permanently archived for anyone to watch whenever they wanted to see what happens when Twitter popularity meets actual policy knowledge. The clip did not just go viral on conservative media platforms, where you would expect it to gain traction. It went absolutely everywhere, crossing partisan and demographic boundaries in ways that political content rarely achieves. Within 12 hours of the hearing ending, the full 5 minutes of Kennedy questioning AOC had been viewed 38 million times across YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and various news websites that embedded the C-SPAN footage. By the 48-hour mark, that number had exploded to over 65 billion. Within a week, over 100 million people had watched some version of the exchange, making it one of the most viewed congressional hearing clips in the history of C-SPAN. What made the video spread far beyond typical partisan circles was the nature of Kennedy's questioning and AOC's responses. He had not engaged in personal attacks or ad hominem arguments. He had not raised his voice even once. He had not been disrespectful or dismissive in his tone. He had simply asked basic, straightforward questions that any serious policy proposal should be able to answer. What does this cost? How do you pay for it? Can you explain how this policy works in practice? These were not gotcha questions designed to trap her with obscure details or trick wording. They were fundamental questions about implementation and cost that anyone proposing to transform the American economy should have ready answers for. And AOC, despite her economics degree from Boston University, despite her 3 years in Congress, despite her millions of Twitter followers and her status as one of the most famous progressives in America, could not answer them. That was not Kennedy being mean or unfair. That was AOC being unprepared. And millions of Americans watching could see the difference clearly. The "just a simple country lawyer" phrase became an instant cultural phenomenon. Video editors on YouTube and TikTok created elaborate compilation videos showing Kennedy using that humble self-description before proceeding to systematically demolish witnesses with his supposedly simple questions. The compilations would show his educational credentials: Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, University of Virginia Law, next to footage of him playing the friendly grandfather from Louisiana, who was just trying to understand all this complicated stuff. The contrast between his actual brilliance and his performed simplicity became a source of endless entertainment and admiration, particularly among younger conservatives who had never paid much attention to Senate hearings before. One particularly viral video intercut Kennedy's questioning of AOC with clips of him questioning other progressive witnesses in previous hearings, all following the same pattern. Start with the humble country lawyer routine. Ask seemingly simple questions. Watch the witness struggle to answer. Maintain perfect politeness throughout. End with devastating summations delivered in that slow Louisiana drawl. The video, titled "Senator Kennedy Being a Savage for 10 Minutes Straight," got 43 million views and introduced Kennedy to an entirely new generation of political watchers who had thought congressional hearings were boring. Conservative media outlets played the exchange on an endless loop, but they did so in ways that emphasized different aspects of Kennedy's technique. Fox News ran segments with legal experts analyzing his questioning style as a masterclass in cross-examination. They brought on law professors who taught trial advocacy to explain how Kennedy had used classic courtroom techniques to box AOC in, making it impossible for her to escape without either answering the question or looking evasive. Sean Hannity dedicated an entire monologue to the exchange, praising Kennedy for doing what he called the job journalists should be doing, asking basic questions and demanding actual answers instead of accepting talking points. Talk radio hosts across the country played the audio of the exchange, sometimes multiple times per show. Rush Limbaugh, in one of his final broadcasts before his death, called it the most devastating 5 minutes of congressional testimony he had ever heard, and praised Kennedy for exposing what he saw as the fundamental emptiness of progressive policy proposals. Local conservative radio hosts in markets across America used clips from the hearing as intro music or bumpers, making Kennedy's voice and questioning style familiar to millions of regular radio listeners who might never have watched C-SPAN. But the impact was not limited to conservative media. Mainstream outlets found themselves unable to ignore the story because the viewing numbers were simply too massive. CNN covered it extensively, though their analysis tried to be more sympathetic to AOC. Their segments featured progressive commentators who argued that Kennedy had been condescending and dismissive, that his simple country lawyer routine was itself a kind of disrespect, and that he was using his experience and position to intimidate a younger colleague. Some CNN analysts suggested that demanding specific cost figures was a bad faith tactic designed to make any ambitious policy proposal look irresponsible. These defenses mostly fell flat because anyone could watch the actual video and see Kennedy being unfailingly polite. His tone never became mocking or cruel. He never called AOC names or questioned her intelligence directly. He just asked questions and waited for answers. The fact that she could not provide good answers was not his fault. It was hers. And most viewers, even those who might be sympathetic to progressive policies in general, could see that distinction clearly. MSNBC's coverage was more divided. Some hosts defended AOC and criticized Kennedy, but others, particularly those with more moderate political leanings, acknowledged that her performance had been problematic. One MSNBC analyst, speaking on background to reporters afterward, admitted that she walked into a trap, but it was a trap she built herself by not doing the basic homework. Another said privately that many Democrats in Congress were frustrated with AOC for making the party look unprepared and giving Republicans such easy ammunition. The exchange had immediate and specific policy impacts that went beyond just damaging AOC's personal brand. The Green New Deal, which had already been struggling to gain traction among mainstream Democrats, worried about its costs and feasibility, became completely toxic politically after Kennedy's questioning. Democrats running in competitive House and Senate races wanted nothing to do with it. When asked about climate policy during campaigns, they would talk in general terms about supporting renewable energy development, investing in clean technology, and reducing emissions over time. But they studiously avoided mentioning AOC's specific Green New Deal proposal by name. The fact that its most prominent advocate could not answer basic questions about cost and implementation made association with it politically dangerous. Campaign strategists working for moderate Democrats began actively advising their candidates to distance themselves from AOC and her policy proposals. Internal polling showed that in swing districts, AOC's brand had become a liability rather than an asset. After the Kennedy hearing, voters in these districts, including many who identified as Democrats, found Kennedy's questions compelling and AOC's inability to answer them troubling. They wanted bold action on climate change, but they also wanted to know it was financially feasible and well-planned. Kennedy had raised reasonable doubts about whether AOC's proposal met those criteria. Medicare for All, while not specifically AOC's legislation, also suffered collateral damage from the exchange. Kennedy's simple question about how to pay for $32 trillion resonated powerfully with voters who supported universal health care in principle, but worried about the practical realities of implementation and cost. Progressive candidates who had been campaigning on Medicare for All found themselves facing more skeptical questions from voters and journalists who wanted specific answers about funding mechanisms. The days of being able to advocate for it purely on moral grounds without defending the economics were over. Kennedy had made the details matter in a way they had not before. The Amazon example became particularly damaging to AOC's credibility on economic issues because Kennedy had explained the difference between tax breaks and government spending in terms that anyone could understand, even people without any economic training. The fact that AOC, who held an economics degree from a prestigious university, had not understood that difference made her look either genuinely ignorant about basic concepts or deliberately dishonest in how she had characterized the Amazon deal. Either interpretation was politically damaging. Defenders of the Amazon deal in New York, many of whom had been attacked and called corporate shills when they had opposed AOC's campaign against it, felt vindicated. They had been saying all along that killing the deal would cost New York jobs and tax revenue. Kennedy had made that argument in the starkest possible terms. She had turned $24 billion into zero. Local New York news outlets revisited the Amazon story with renewed interest, interviewing economic development experts who explained in detail what the city had lost and why AOC's understanding of tax policy had been flawed. Perhaps most significantly for AOC personally, her entire political brand took a major hit that would prove difficult to recover from. She had built her persona on being the smart young progressive who was going to shake up the establishment with bold new ideas backed by intellectual rigor. The economics degree from Boston University was part of that brand. The quick wit and confident assertions were part of that brand. The image of someone who had done her homework and knew what she was talking about was central to how she had presented herself. Kennedy's 5 minutes of simple questions had shattered that image completely. He had exposed that maybe she was young and bold and good at social media, but not actually that well-informed when it came to the details of policy implementation. Maybe she was better at generating Twitter engagement than at actual governing. Maybe the economics degree was just a credential that did not translate to practical understanding. Maybe the confidence was actually overconfidence, masking a lack of real preparation. For weeks afterward, anytime AOC gave a speech or did an interview, someone would inevitably ask her to clarify costs or provide specific numbers. She clearly hated it. She had gotten used to speaking in broad, inspirational terms about what needed to be done without having to defend the details of how. Kennedy had made details matter again. He had shown that passion and conviction are not substitutes for actual policy knowledge. Kennedy himself became a viral sensation in a way that surprised many people who did not normally follow congressional proceedings. Young conservatives started sharing his questioning techniques as models for how to debate progressives. Just ask them what it costs became a standard response to ambitious progressive proposals. Show me the math started appearing on T-shirts and memes. Kennedy's office was flooded with requests for him to question other progressive politicians using his signature style. He leaned into it. In subsequent hearings, he would make a point of asking similar simple questions of other witnesses advocating expensive progressive policies. The simple country lawyer routine became his brand. And it was devastatingly effective because he had proven it worked. He could make smart people who had not done their homework look foolish without ever being rude or losing his temper. 6 months after the hearing, AOC's polling numbers showed the damage. Her favorability ratings had dropped 12 points among independents. Even among Democrats, while she remained popular with the progressive base, more moderate party members increasingly saw her as a liability rather than an asset. The video of Kennedy's questioning became standard opposition research material that would be used against her in future campaigns. More importantly, AOC seemed genuinely rattled by the experience in a way that changed her public behavior. She became notably more cautious about making specific policy claims. She relied more heavily on prepared statements and talking points. When doing interviews, she would steer away from detailed policy discussions toward broader values-based arguments. The confidence and swagger that had marked her early years in Congress was tempered by what appeared to be a recognition that she had been exposed on a very public stage. The ultimate irony was that Kennedy's performance was not particularly complex or difficult to replicate. He had not used some sophisticated rhetorical technique that required years of training to master. He just asked simple questions and insisted on getting answers. Any competent questioner could do the same thing if they prepared properly and had the courage to press for actual responses instead of accepting talking points. That is what made the whole exchange so memorable and so damaging. It was not that Kennedy had done something extraordinary. It was that answering his questions should have been ordinary, routine, and expected from anyone proposing major legislation. The fact that AOC could not do it revealed a fundamental lack of preparation and understanding that no amount of media savvy or Twitter followers could compensate for. This was not a debate between competing policy visions. This was a Rhodes Scholar disguised as a country lawyer exposing a bartender with an economics degree she did not understand. This was preparation meeting popularity and revealing the difference. John Kennedy had spent hours going through AOC's public statements, identifying claims she had made without evidence and finding assertions she could not back up. He had prepared simple questions that any serious policymaker should be able to answer. He had practiced his delivery, perfecting that folksy Southern gentleman routine that made people underestimate him right up until the moment they realized they had been trapped. AOC had prepared talking points and passion. She had assumed her media fame and progressive credentials would carry her through. She had thought she could inspire people with her vision without having to defend the details. She was wrong. The exchange proved something important about political communication in the social media age. Twitter followers and Instagram popularity can make you famous. Viral videos can make you influential, but none of that is a substitute for actually knowing what you are talking about. None of that prepares you to answer simple questions about cost, implementation, and consequences. None of that makes you ready to defend policy against someone who has done their homework. Kennedy showed that you do not need to yell or insult people to expose their lack of preparation. You do not need elaborate rhetorical strategies or complex debate tactics. You just need to ask simple questions and refuse to accept non-answers. What does it cost? How will you pay for it? Can you explain this basic concept? Where is your evidence? These are simple questions that reveal whether someone has actually thought through their proposals or is just repeating talking points that sound good. AOC could not explain costs because she had never bothered to calculate them. She could not defend the Amazon decision because she had never understood the basic economics of tax breaks. She could not explain unemployment statistics because she had made claims without checking if they were actually true. She could not show how to pay for Medicare, for all because she had assumed passion about universal health care was enough without needing a realistic funding plan. And she could not point to legislative accomplishments because she had spent her time on Twitter instead of actually doing the work of legislating. Kennedy's 5 minutes of questioning exposed all of that with devastating clarity. And he did it while being unfailingly polite, speaking slowly with his Louisiana accent, maintaining his simple country lawyer persona right up until the end when he delivered that final summation that left no doubt he knew exactly what he had done and why. If you think policies should have answers to basic questions about cost and implementation, share this story. If you believe an economics degree should mean you understand economics, share this story. If you think Twitter followers are not the same thing as governing competence, share this story. Because Senator Kennedy proved that simple questions can expose everything when the person being questioned has not done their homework. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is play dumb and let someone expose themselves with their own words.